Here are a bunch of new articles about The Last of Us Part 2, and they mostly focus on interviews with Neil Druckmann and his comments on the process and the building of the game and that sort of thing. So the first one we're going to skip. Just I wanted to bring this to your attention just because the title is essentially clickbait. Druckmann doesn't call the people haters, or at least not in the interview, but that's kind of the thing that's interesting to read about. It's like, hey, wait, did he really call the people haters and want them to play the game anyway? Because that's not a good PR way or a good marketing message to tell your audience, hey, all you haters, play the game anyway. You suck. It's not, you don't win people over by calling them names. So I don't think he even mentions that in the post. So that's just the Eddie Makuk way of getting people's attention to read the article. So hey, I read the article, Eddie. So yeah, you conned us because he didn't actually say that or didn't call people that, at least within this blog post. We're going to go on to the next one, which is from VG247, which is actually from an interview on GQ magazine. And this is about diversity in storytelling. Diversity is important because it leads to better stories, says Naughty Dog correctly. Oh, correctly, really? So already another title which is misleading or is imposing a belief based off the author's intent or ideology, what have you. Nothing about one's background or one's skin tone or where you come from the world is going to make a better story. That's just background information. It's what that background information does for a character, meaning why is the character the way they are, what they're striving for, if it's connected to the plot at all, does something in their childhood matter? It's more or less motivations and reasoning behind a character. It has nothing to do with what part of the world they were born in, what their skin tone is, what style of hair they were born with, and those sorts of things. Yeah, that is character building. It gives us flavor. It gives us some sort of understanding of where this character came from. But if it's unrelated to things, then it's called tokenism. And all you're doing is slamming in a white guy or a black guy or a brown girl or this or that for the sake of having it. That's not good storytelling. Diversity does not equate to good storytelling. What's more important is to have non-diverse characters or characters that converge to a point because of their backgrounds, because of their similarities to each other. And the antagonist and the protagonist are so close, but just slightly different, that makes them much more interesting and much more conflicted because they're so similar. So having these directly, completely opposite people from different parts of the world, like an Eskimo lesbian midget or something, and then you have a Scandinavian Viking blonde man, it's just like, okay, that's not going to make a more interesting story. It's going to make it a weird scenario between people of different backgrounds for whatever reason. That's diversity itself doesn't matter. In fact, it would screw things up if you do stupid stuff like that. So I'm going to go from this, and I'm going to go to the other article as well. This is what Druckmann said in his interview. At Naughty Dog, diversity is as important as graphics, combat, and music because ultimately it leads to better stories. So again, that's his quote. That's categorically incorrect. Just because you have a black woman and a white child or an Asian elderly man, it makes no difference. It really doesn't. It has to do with the context of what the hell this is all about, why this is relevant. Is this a contemporary setting? Is this some sort of metropolis? What does the background of someone have anything to do with the story? Ashley Johnson, who is the actor, I believe, of Ellie, shared a story with me where someone came up to her and told her that The Last of Us gave her the courage to come out to her family. It's amazing that a story was able to do that. Those stories are inspiring to say, look, when we tell varied stories, they can have a real impact and effect on people. I think that's in relation to the DLC of The Last of Us, where it's revealed that Ellie is homosexual. Fine. Yeah, that's not a big deal. Sexuality that was just for the sake of having it. There was no real storytelling value as far as I can tell. There's no plot relevance to Ellie's sexuality. So what? Now, does it make people feel comfortable? Of course, stories have that power. I remember all kinds of stories from people who were depressed, who lost a loved one, who were transitioning from one location of their life to another. And this was just playing Mass Effect 2. People were saying how great, how thankful they were to the creators for making this character or that character I could relate to. That has nothing to do with the topic at hand. They just found solace in playing a game or reading a book or watching a movie. There was a cathartic element to those experiences for these people, not necessarily because the topic was the same. So it's a strange thing to say that, yeah, this is stories are good because people relate to these things. It's like, of course someone's going to relate to something. Of course a gay man or a gay woman or a bisexual person is going to relate to this or that other character on that topic, sure. But that's like, less than 10%, less than 5% of the populace. How about the drama of the actual background of the characters and why they're doing what they're doing? Why do you care for these characters? What are they trying to do? What are they struggling for? What are their ideals? What are their virtues? What are their vices? What's their opposition? That's what really matters. And if you can tie that into a background, great. If you can tie that into a sexuality or a sexual preference or whatever, great. But having it for the sake of it, just because it's diverse, that is not relevant. You want stories to have meaning, not random elements and thinking, oh, it's diverse now, therefore better. No, it's not. In fact, character diversity is one of the reasons Westworld writer Hallie Gross came on board to help write The Last of Us Part 2. For agreeing to the job, she saw some concept art of a muscular woman who's played by Laura Bailey. As soon as I saw that the drawing of her with these effing awesome shoulders and big tough arms, I was like, you're going to show me this in games? She said, I'm in. Now, we all know probably who she's referring to, but that's a very strange reason for a writer to come on board to look at a muscular woman for concept art to join a video game. So let's just jump on over to that and talk about Hallie Gross for a bit. So here's that part of the interview. So she was drawn to the females in the story for whatever reason. So Gross is here because Druckmann needed help, another perspective, a writer capable of crafting believable people. Okay, that's interesting. Now, I'm not saying Druckmann is a horrible writer. Everyone needs help in some aspect of writing. That's totally cool. But if you can't craft believable characters, what are you doing? What the heck do you think writing is about? You're not writing about walls and cars and trees. You're writing about characters. So if your characters aren't very believable, that's like you telling me you're a bad writer. You don't know how to write. So that's a very damaging, or rather damning, statement. I can't write characters. It's like, are you serious? What do you mean you can't write characters? What do you do when you write? A writer capable of writing better jokes than he can, while also being able to help him push him even further narratively. I have a much time easier writing personal conflict and drama and violence than I do romance. Okay, so that's strange because he just said a writer crafting believable people. So personal conflict and drama, but he can't do romance. Now, romance is not for everyone. It's very simple. Whether you're a male and a female and you're writing a story about love towards another male or female makes no difference. The power dynamic, the sexuality, the innuendo, the flirting, it's relatively all the same with some minor changes until you get to the nitty-gritty, but the overall vibe is exactly the same. Yes, there are some social dynamics between males and females which are unique, which are found between male friends and female friends. You could say the same with bisexual responses or people, but romance is all about attraction. It's all about that sort of hunter relationship. So maybe Druckmann doesn't get it. That's fine. Calling someone else to help is okay. It's just interesting. I can get the comedy. Writing better jokes. Comedy's a whole category. You could have a whole job being a comedian. But romance? I think almost anyone could do romance. It's not hard. And I struggle with that, and I feel a little uncomfortable about it, and I can't quite tell you why. Having Hallie on board and having a lot of the ideas for that stuff come from her, and then us developing them together gave me that confidence, like, let's go in areas we've never done before. I think without that female voice, it would have been much harder. I agree, having another person of any denomination to write about women, especially getting women to write on that, is great. On romance is great. So this is all normal stuff. I just didn't like how they described Druckmann as being bad at writing characters and romance itself. So in many ways, Gross is Druckmann's perfect inversion, yada yada. They play off each other. Okay, great. They work well together. So here's another headline. Undecided on whether his next game will be The Last of Us or a new IP, which related to this article because he wasn't sure whether or not he was going to do a sequel to The Last of Us or do a new IP. So now he's saying, hey, I'm probably just going to do a new IP. We'll see how Last of Us 3 does or whether they want to even do any further. But the point of The Last of Us Part 2 was to do a sequel in continuation of Ellie and Joel's story. And other people were saying, well, why don't you do it in another area, another part of the world, etc. He says, no, we're going to stick to being an actual sequel. And we'll get into the rest of the article. It's a pretty big article to read. But what I want to talk about is back to the original topic, was diversity. Just because it's such a silly thing to say. And here's an article from thegamer.com. And I don't totally agree with all this. You see some characters here like Birdo, who's apparently trans. Nintendo was never very clear on that. But the first example I'm going to touch upon. So here's Juhani, who is specifically a female romance option. So if you're playing as a female Jedi or a female character, Juhani is optional for that romance. The thing is, it doesn't really matter to her character that much. It is part of her backstory, though. And that's kind of the problem why she went to the dark side. There are some other issues with it, but that is a way of doing it well. Way back in 2003 with KotOR. And the great thing about Juhani is also plays into the major theme of the story, which is the light and dark side dynamic, which is also part of the gameplay as well. So this is a great example of having a character who fits the story as well as their own personal backstory and why they're doing what they're doing. I think when you find Juhani, she's all dark side, even though she was a previous Jedi. She's still on, I can't remember the name of the planet, but that's where the Jedi are. So they realize she's there, so they want you to take care of her. And you fight her, you defeat her, and then you bring her back to the light side if you want. And voila, it fits her character. And we don't care that she's homosexual. We don't care that she's female or an alien cat person. None of that matters, but it connects. It works. The background for this character is there. It does not matter. So this is the opposite of tokenism. And we compare that, this is a great example, to Mass Effect Andromeda, which I'm not even going to get into because it's just so stupid. Some trans character who went on a trip because they thought they weren't feeling connected at home, so they went on this ridiculous voyage across to another galaxy. And all you get is this silly line showing their previous name was Stefan, but that was never who I was. It's like, okay, great. That's it. No depth, just a surface level response. That's silly. There's other characters from Capcom like Poison, which is weird because in North America or in the rest of the world, it's a trans character or a trans woman, whereas in Japan, it's canonically a female. And this is another surface level character. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't make any bit of difference. There's barely any story with these characters. They're just opponents or characters to fight in the Street Fighter series. So, not a big deal. Now, that was BioWare here in these two examples, which they did one very well and one very, well, not even poorly, just stupidly. Then we have one that was done very poorly. Jacob Taylor. This is the bro-talking black man who all he wants to do is find out who his dad is, and then he decides to cheat on you if you had a romance with him, if you were a female Shep, and he has a child out of wedlock. I think I just summarized Jacob Taylor. The funny thing about Jacob Taylor is he had his own game called Mass Effect Galaxy, which was originally going to be called Jacob's Story. So they had all this background, all this information on Jacob Taylor. There he is in the Mass Effect Galaxy game. He was in comic books. They had all this backstory, all this information on Jacob Taylor. And what did they do with him? They turned him into a beefcake. That's it. He wants to get drinks on the Citadel or in Rio and have drinks with you, and that's it. He likes doing sit-ups. He likes eventually getting drinks. We never see that, even though you have a whole party. Or apparently he likes drinking. You think he'd be a connoisseur. You think he'd have some sophistication. He'd have what to do with parties. And he likes saluting. That's Jacob Taylor. He has a crappy father, and he gets angry at that, and that's about it. There he is doing sit-ups. Whoop-de-doo. Horrible, I wouldn't say token, just horribly done. So even with you have a diverse cast in an alien galaxy or alien universe, the most human of characters, who is a person of color, is stereotyped. Which is trash. He's one of the most boring, probably more boring than Caden. Like, he is just that bland and boring. And this is with all the backstory, with all the tertiary or primary sources outside of the main primary source. We have Galaxy, the comics, so secondary sources and tertiary sources. Horrible character, boring as ass. Now, last year I did a book review called The Toll. And The Toll is a trilogy, the third story of the Arc of Scythe books by Neil Shusterman. And it's a pretty cool science fiction story, I'd say. And for whatever reason, he tokenized a character. And that character was called Jericho. And in the book, it's never quite described what sex Jericho is. And the way it's described is he or she or they feel feminine in the morning and masculine at night, or feminine in the water and masculine on land, because they are a captain of a ship. And it feels forced. It feels ridiculous because it's not explained well. The background is explained, why they feel the way they do. They come from, I think, Madagascar, where in that part of the world in the future, where they've achieved immortality, there's this certain frivolous attitude about life and traveling on boats and seafaring. So most people, not most, but a lot of people there have this capricious sexuality. But it comes along with transgenderism, which is going a step too far. If it stopped with sexuality, we'd be fine. But this is now sexual identity. And that's where things get confusing. So even a good writer, whom I absolutely love, Neil Shusterman and his entire trilogy for young adults, even he can succumb to crappy inclusions and diversity quotas, or tokenism as we call it. So just because Neil Druckmann has an author to help him out doesn't mean they're going to write females right, or lesbian females right, or bisexual men and women right, or people with gender dysphoria, or other kinds of sexual identities. So no, diversity does not make you a better writer. It does not make your stories better. All you're doing is adding unnecessary fluff, and you're trying to win brownie points to whomever cares about this crap and doesn't know how to tell a good story. Anyway, that was my bit. Thanks for listening, guys. Have yourself a great day.